Ah, Good evening, everybody. This is the Mansfield Town Council. We have a special meeting tonight on August 30th, 2023 to discuss parks and recreation. We do have a quorum. We were a little concerned about that at an earlier time, but we have enough to continue. If you notice, it's dinner time, and so several of us are eating as we have this conversation. So the first item on the agenda is a call to roll. Mr. Aylesworth, as our acting town clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Moran,
Here.
Shaken, Shuren, Berthelot,
Here.
Cotton,
Here.
Osberger, Kiefner,
Here.
Coleman, Bruder.
Here.
Thank you.
I understand Mr. Shuren is out of town. I'm not sure what the other folks are unable to be here, but we do have,
Mr. Coleman wanted me to express his regrets. He was planning to be here. He had to make an unplanned trip to the hospital today. Otherwise, he would be here.
well, we do hope he's well. All right, the next item on our agenda is the Parks and Recreation. So, Mr. Aylesworth, would you proceed?
Sure. So I know the council's met with Jamie Sabak previously. Jamie is the founder and president of 110% Inc. It's the firm that we're working with on our Parks and Recreation master planning process and the financial sustainability strategy work. I believe we are, I don't know, are we 9 months into this process? Something like that. Started shortly after the new year. And so this is kind of her latest visit to town. As the council will recall, we had a meeting, a session with you all, specifically on the topic of the financial sustainability strategy piece. It was about an hour-long session scheduled before a council meeting. And so we got into some depth. I think that was July 10th. But coming out of that meeting and conferring with Jamie, we thought it would be helpful to have maybe a little bit of a deeper dive, like a 2.5 hour work session, so we could explore some of these intricate details a little bit more. And so tonight the focus will be on the financial sustainability piece. I'm sure we'll talk about some programmatic elements, but it's really an opportunity to have a little bit more back and forth and kind of get into some of the rich philosophical discussion that'll inform future policy decisions. So with that, Jamie, just so you know, because we have remote participants, even though you're kind of principally addressing people in the room, and because this is being recorded, anything in order to be recorded and captured, you have to speak directly into that microphone. You got to practically be eating it. And the yellow lights, if you hit the push button, if it's not already on, then it'll be on. And then for the council, I apologize. So Jamie's going to be operating her presentation from an external device she has on the table. So it will not be projected on these screens. It'll be there and it'll be behind you, Mayor. So for your purposes, you'll probably want to be looking at that screen. And I guess we'll go from there. All right, thanks.
Could I just add one other thing? This is a special meeting of the town council, and we often conduct these meetings a little bit less formally than we do a full regular town council meeting. So it'd be perfectly fine with me if we address one another by first names.
Well, good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you again about the master plan as well as its complement, which is the financial sustainability strategy for the Park and Recreation Department and the services and facilities offered through that organization. Amanda is going to be helping guide the ship, if you will. She's going to be sharing some insights relative to the financial condition of the park and recreation system in particular here in a few minutes. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of our agenda while we're going to.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, because she's operating off an external device. You'll have to, yeah.
So as you see on the screen, this is the agenda we'll follow this evening. We'll spend most of our time on items 1 and 2, specifically diving into financial conditions, both operating as well as capital conversation. I'm going to be revisiting the strategy process and in particular the beneficiary of service model that you all contributed to the development of. and capturing your thoughts and perspectives on what you see and what you hear. And then we'll wrap up with a bit of connectivity to the master plan. How does this financial sustainability work really inform the master planning effort? Open it for additional thoughts, comments, questions that you have, and then a quick process overview, kind of where we are in the timetable of the development of the process. A bit of a reminder from our last meeting, while this is a master planning effort and it's been referred to as a master planning effort throughout, there's a significant complement to the master plan. There are actually two moving parts. There's the financial sustainability strategy as well as the master plan. Tonight, we're focused principally on the financial sustainability work that's been completed. And it's again, a bit of a refresh, but the reason that the organization expressed an interest in this was to ensure that there was a sustainability component to the master plan, that we're not just imagining and envisioning a future that you may not be able to pay for. And so that's really the principal reason why this particular strategy was built into the RFP, was built into the exercise, was built into the scope of work that we presented. And I have to say out loud, I've said this to Ryan, I've said it to Jay a number of times, to the staff in particular. It's really important to celebrate the fact that Mansfield's chosen to do this. We have far too many park and recreation systems across the country today that are not sustainable. They're creating systems they can't pay for. So I do want to acknowledge and extend, I will, a 30+ year career professional, my appreciation to Mansfield, as well as all the other systems in the country that are starting to do this work and taking it a little bit more seriously than they have in the past. So I'm going to start here, and I think this is, it's become even more and more compelling relative to the importance of financial sustainability in local government as a whole, but in particular, of course, in our focus in parks and recreation. And that is kind of balancing the nuances of this Venn diagram and what it represents. The cautionary tale around adding more services to a system, expecting high level of service, and at the same time keeping fees and taxes low. We recognize, I think, and realize that we only get two of these. If we want to keep our taxes and our fees low or stabilize them, and we want high quality service, then we're probably going to have to embrace the idea that we've got a smaller service menu so that we can do really good work. Alternatively, if we want a high level of service, or I'm sorry, a lot of services, and we want to keep our fees and taxes low or stabilized, then our quality of service is going to suffer. And finally, if we want more services and we want a high level of service, then we're probably going to have to pay more. We've got to find the resources to support that system. So it becomes a really important lens through which we see this work and the importance of financial sustainability in public parks and recreation. So I want to introduce this idea of conditions and reality as it relates to our conversation this evening and the information and data we're going to share with you. And it's a bit of a refresh, but I think recognizing the value that your residents get from this system and from the town's park and recreation services is really important to this conversation. The investment that the community makes, every community member here, supports a pretty broad and impressive service menu. You think about the Mansfield Community Center, you think of all the services that are offered, and you think about the parks and the open spaces and trails that are provided. It's very impressive for a community of this size. And the important thing, of course, and I'd say the critical foundation and pillar around this work is to ensure that it's sustainable, right? That it can continue for the long haul, not just 2023. We talk often about the citizens of 2050 or the residents of 2050 and how to ensure that they can appreciate, value, and use the services that are in place today, and possibly, obviously, even more down the road. So I'm going to pass the baton and the controls over to Amanda, and she's going to share with you some insights relative to the financial conditions of Parks and Recreation.
Good evening, everybody. So as Jamie just listed, Parks and Recreation offers a wide variety of services to our residents. And I think it's important to look at how much of the taxpayer dollar is going towards these services. As you can see on the screen, we are focusing on fiscal year 23 because it was the last year that we have full financial data for. But for fiscal year 23, the median home was paying $53.49 towards recreation. You'll note that that is the second lowest category on that screen. I did also look at it for fiscal year 24, knowing that the council chose to increase the appropriation for fiscal year 24, and it remained at 1.2% or $58. So again, for the amount of services that were listed on the previous slide, you can see that currently our residents are not paying a tremendous amount of money. And again, that's for a median home at 228. The other half would be below that, and the other half would be above that. So in terms of contributions to the general fund, this outlines how much has actually been contributed year over year to Mansfield Parks and Recreation. I will note that in fiscal years 20, 21, and 22, the council chose to appropriate additional money towards the Parks and Recreation Fund. A lot of that had to do with COVID and the halting of all program revenue. But an additional $877,000 was transferred over the past 5 years, above and beyond what the taxpayers were contributing towards the fund. And as you can see, this is a significant investment in order to keep the recreation fund functioning. It's not up there, so that's the actual contributions. I did a comparison on my own of budget to actual. I'll be happy to distribute that to everybody after the fact if you'd like. So this is actual. I took what we budgeted versus that actual number, and we sent 877 more than what we had put in the budget.
We were having such significant deficits at the community center in particular, but also Parks and Rec in general, that we had to make up some of the losses. And so we took some of our reserves, and I think we put some ARPA money in there as well. But
Yeah, we didn't use ARPA money specifically. We're contemplating using ARPA funds to replenish money in the general fund that we transferred out. Basically, you could just think of it as at the end of the day, it's like it reduced the amount we would have otherwise contributed to fund balance for that given year to the general fund.
And
so originally we budgeted 683,830.
so for fiscal year 23, you contributed what you budgeted. So that is correct. For fiscal year 22, you only budgeted 812, but you contributed 912 at the end of the day because additional appropriations were made during the year.
Right. I think you have to go back a slide or two. So the FY23 number, yeah, so 610,830. Okay, maybe it wouldn't. So if you went back in time, FY22, FY21, FY20, basically the appropriation, the budgeted appropriation, the planned appropriation from the general fund to the Parks and Recreation Fund was in that roughly $600,000 area. So had it not been for some of the additional deficits that emerged, the mayor referenced COVID and the pandemic, and basically a wholesale loss in membership during that time, the circumstances would have been different. But because the deficits were larger than we anticipated when we budgeted at the end of each for two or three of those years, there was an additional sort of year-end transfer from the general fund above and beyond the budgeted amount. So it was a supplemental appropriation and that's why that number is closer to $1 million as opposed to 600-some thousand.
And actually, so this slide is just a graph representation of revenue versus expenditures. And you can see every year they're relatively close to each other. Some years we are overperforming and some years we are underperforming. And the next slide has the values related to that. And again, as Ryan just mentioned, had the council not appropriated additional money, this fund would be in a far worse position at the moment.
Does the overall budget anticipate user fees or user fees on top of the budget?
So user fees would be included in this slide, in this revenue. This revenue line includes user fees and the general fund contribution. This is what's tracked in the recreation fund.
So when we say the budget, does that include user fees or?
Not in the general fund budget, no. The general fund budget is just the taxpayer dollar contribution that's going into this fund.
remember that we have a separate fund for the Parks and Recreation, the Recreation Fund, and what the money that goes into that fund comes from fees and charges as well as the general fund contribution.
Is there an overall?
Yeah,
budget?
so the overall budget for Parks and Rec, so the overall budget lives in the Park and Rec Fund. And all sources of revenue to support Parks and Rec, we budget for and we try to report and project. So that would include memberships, user fees, all sorts of revenue. It also includes the transfer from the general fund into the Parks and Rec fund. So that the Parks and Rec fund is where you would find all of the detail, revenue and expenditure budgets.
And we'll talk about that tonight.
That's what those numbers are right there. That's for each fiscal year, the actual revenue and the actual expenditure number from the recreation fund. So the revenue, as was mentioned, includes all of the user fees, all the program fees, the transfer from the general fund. The expenditures include the program expenditures for running recreation. Yes. Correct.
And then can you just go back one slide for me? I forgot about this part. The reason why we gave so much is we didn't collect any membership fees during
Correct.
COVID. Okay.
Yes. COVID was a driver in many communities, all of the communities across Connecticut, and many councils have been giving additional appropriations to their recreation funds because without having the programming and without being able to operate, there was no revenue. Oh, this does not, all of these numbers, both this slide and the next slide with the numbers do not include any sort of capital expenditures related to recreation. This is strictly operational. And again, just to reiterate, if the council hadn't appropriated more money, this fund would be in the hole around $1 million right now. It would be a negative $1 million deficit. We are looking to end fiscal year 23 at a small deficit, but that can be recouped in future years. The 27,248.
So
go
big
ahead.
picture, I mean, several years ago, there was real worry that Parks and Recreation as a whole was losing ground because of the issue of many people using their Medicare Advantage payments for the community center. Has that ceased to be an issue?
That particular revenue concern continues. When the Silver Sneakers Medicare Advantage benefit became available largely to, I don't know if it's exclusively to or just largely to retired state employees, of which we have quite a few here because of UConn. There was a huge shift. Jay would probably be able to quote the actual numbers, but a huge shift, large volumes of people that were otherwise, kind of quote unquote full paying members that now we're essentially able to get a membership for free because they don't pay out of pocket for it. We get reimbursed through the Silver Sneakers program at a much, much, much reduced rate versus what they were paying.
So is this deficit because of that, or is this deficit because of other things, or is it mostly that continues to be the main problem?
It's certainly a major challenge, problem, and it's a large contributing factor to it, continues to be.
Percentage wise?
I don't know if we-
It's hard to say because fiscal years 20 and 21 were so greatly impacted by COVID. If the general fund hadn't contributed an extra $300,000 each year, you would have had significant losses in those years, and you wouldn't really be able to isolate out whether it was due to COVID or due to Silver Sneakers.
But the deficit for 2023, is that deficit mostly because of the Medicare Advantage plans, or is it because of?
No, and we'll share some of the data with you about Silver Sneakers and the other subsidized services here in a little bit. We're not going to get into every service as you can imagine, but I'm going to share with you some interesting information that will help
Because
inform
That's
your
keenly
question.
what, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, what a major concern that I have.
Yeah, you have a series of services that receive heavy subsidy. And I'll share again the top 15 that are furthest away from full cost recovery or 100% cost recovery. So I think that'll answer your question.
And just to go back to that conversation that we had, it was kind of the genesis in large part for why we hired you to sort of look at things overall. We started having this conversation about Silver Sneakers because it was presented as this is a major driver in the financial situation, COVID notwithstanding. And I think the question, partially at least, that we were hoping to answer as a council in whether we continue to participate in Silver Sneakers or not, as that acute sort of question was, we are subsidizing it. We continue to subsidize it. It's clear no matter how great of a job Jay and his team do at marketing it to our residents, there's no way it will ever pay us more per user because there's a capitation on it than a full membership.
Can I make a
And-
suggestion, Ben? I really think we ought to let these guys make their presentation. I'm sure they will get there, but I think we're jumping the gun. And I think they may have a slightly different approach that may help us see this in a different light.
Well, I think, yes, but let me just say the question is, should we continue to subsidize it among many questions? Are
Among
there better
many-
uses for that subsidy? And that's, I think, what you're hoping to get to later.
Yeah, and we'll share with you again, a few services, I'll say 15 of the 1,000 plus that you offer that are receiving significant subsidy. And that begs a question, is that where you want to put your taxpayer resources? So-
Thanks.
So this slide I feel is important. So on the far left column is the money going into the recreation fund. You have the general fund transfer, contributions from capital, and the revenue from membership fees and programming. You'll see it's compared to the recreation expenditures, which are in the middle column, and that there is a gap of around $73,000. What is not taken into account in the Parks and Recreation Fund is the public works expenses on our trails, which is tracked separately in the public works budget, and that's fine, but those are additional expenses that are related to operating your Parks and Recreation system. So our very, very rough estimate, and I think it's light, I think we're missing a few things in that, was that parks are contributing around $250,000 annually in time and supplies towards maintaining our facilities and our parks. So overall, that leaves us at a gap of almost $320,000 for breaking even based on the services that we're offering.
And then one of the first slides that you had a breakdown of how much we're paying for a median household, was that part of that 50 plus?
It is
number?
not.
Okay.
That's part of Public Works' budget.
Thank you.
I just have a visualization question here. So you're showing our $611,000 taxpayer taxes contribution to Parks and Rec. Obviously, that's how you account for it in the budget, but we are paying for 100% of the public works budget out of taxpayer funds. And so that number, if we were looking at it outside of how your accounts work, which is correct in the budget, it should actually be higher. We shouldn't be seeing this so much as a deficit, right? Like, there shouldn't be an expectation if we've always subsidized,
Yes.
we've always contributed taxpayer money
To
to
Parks
the
and
existence of parks and recreation in the town of Mansfield, without user fees. We've also always paid for all of what public works and maintenance does out of taxpayer dollars, and they have always maintained our parks and services. And so to think of this as
So here's a
a
way
deficit doesn't seem right.
so here's maybe a way I would propose interpreting what's here that I think addresses what Ben just said. So in a sense, what we're saying, not in a sense, in reality, what we're saying is that on the money inside, that blue box, the $611,000 general fund transfer, that is underreporting to the tune of $250,000, the actual contribution from the general fund. So if you basically said the hard money that we just contribute in, that we appropriate to, and then we also added the contribution that's just happening through the general fund, through the public works budget, the money in would be that $248,000 higher.
Got it.
I see $600,000 as a little strip, and then I go up and see 247,000 is probably twice as much.
Yeah, the Excel, the formatting here is off based on
Way
the
off.
projection system. Yeah, it was not done with intention. It was how the Excel transferred into the
Okay,
slide deck.
I
So,
wish you hadn't put it that way because it presents itself as, oh, here's the proportions.
yeah, we understand, but please just focus on the numerics rather than
Okay.
the size of the boxes, if you can, please.
Do we have hard copies of this?
We'll circulate it. We did not print copies in advance, but we'll circulate the presentation after tonight.
So I think this is a great place to pause, although you've been asking questions throughout. We wanted to check in, hit the pause button a few times this evening, see if you have any thoughts, comments, et cetera, relative to what's been shared thus far.
Can we go back to that previous slide? Thank you. So my understanding of this is the column, it's money in, it's all the money that we have coming in, the money out. You're now accounting for the public work expenses that you anticipate, that you have quantified as related to public works. Parks, right, from public works. Thank you. And then the difference is the gap of what we didn't budget enough of and the public works expenditures.
So basically, what we're trying to show right now is that the money coming in on an annual basis is basically $320,000 less than the expenditure. So revenue is 321,000 less than expenditures. When you factor, when
I
you do
got
like a true cost accounting, when you bring in, because again, I want to use the word hidden because it was not an attempt to
Right.
conceal. We just
No.
didn't isolate within the public works budget that which is, so like when you try to tease out and do a full cost accounting, this is what you find.
I don't know how my colleagues feel about this, but I view Parks and Rec as a service that should be provided, and as much as we can get revenue from fees and things to that sort that doesn't prohibit or exclude people from participating, that's great. But I also don't have a problem funding it fully like we do the public works. I mean, we want to be efficient with our tax dollars. We certainly don't want to, be wasteful, but I appreciate showing the difference of what the revenues are coming in from fees and whatnot versus, what we actually are spending. But I think it'll be good when we continue to figure out how to prioritize how we want to use those taxpayer dollars for various things.
Can we move on? Because I thought we'd sort of run out of questions. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
No, are we obliged in some form, required to, as we've called it here, subsidize the silver sneakers? Are we forced to take this money and only that money, and then we have to provide a full membership?
So specific about silver sneakers, no. The town, when the program came to be, we decided at the time, and it's not a forever thing, we can opt out. The decision was made because again, until you become a participating member, until you have actual like lived experience data, it's kind of, I don't want to say a wild guess, but every community, that has a Parks and Rec program or a community center fitness facility that accepts silver sneakers, they've had their own experience with what that did with the revenue. And so I think going in, without getting too granular, just looking to Jay, I think when Kurt was here, Kurt Vincenti, the previous director, we probably gathered data from other communities and based on what we tried to put together a projection of what we thought the impact was going to be on the revenue here. And I think at the time, the thought was there was going to be a net benefit in revenue, right? That there was going to be like the volume, maybe like the volume of new participants through silver sneakers would more than cover the gap in terms of like the full dues paying members. And then the actual revenue story has been different. But Jay, feel free to come up here, Jay, just to make sure you use the microphone.
Is this the appropriate time to have the silver sneakers discussion, or do you have another space for it? Because
We're going to address, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be
Okay.
sharing some data with you about silver
all right,
sneakers.
because that's a very specific part of the budget issue. So we've now gotten a very general overview, and I would like you to proceed. I don't want to take more time than we need to.
How does this our profile compare to other places that you are aware of, or the general situation more broadly?
So every system is different. There are obviously elements that are unique in every municipality or special district. Your cost recovery, I would say, is not, you're not high or low. And frankly, you're only accounting for a portion of your expenses. So that's really been a bit of a driver in this exercise. What is a bit of an anomaly, although I've seen this before, is your parks maintenance is not in the Park and Recreation Fund, and it presents a series of challenges. So we've done our best in this first iteration of a cost of service analysis to account for a portion of those expenses, but we've not accounted for all. So it's not quite as accurate as it should be, but it's a baseline from which to begin. But having your park maintenance expenses, so maintaining ball field rentals, maintaining your trail system and your park system is not part of the equation. And it's what we're attempting to do is bring that into the fold, as Amanda mentioned, bring it in so we have a better understanding of the subsidy, the total subsidy to Parks and Recreation, regardless of what service area it exists in, regardless of whether it's in Public Works. We need to account for it because it tells then the cost of doing business. And then you can make decisions around where you want to invest your resources, what cost recovery you're going to expect, and so on. That is not common. Parks and Recreation expenses tend to be in the same bucket, and here they're not.
And maybe, because I don't know that you alluded to it, and I apologize if Amanda specifically said this, but the Parks and Rec, sorry, the Public Works expenses toward Parks and Rec that was reported, that $250,000 number, that's just labor, essentially, right? That's what we were able to isolate. That is basically those employees in grounds and the time that they commit to maintaining Parks and
Public
Rec.
Works did provide a very rough, high-level
Okay.
estimate of supplies, but I think that number could use some.
Okay, so it did attempt to, but we think that if you had a full, more accurate accounting, that number would go up from there, not down from there. Okay.
I have a question. Just sort of generally, obviously, COVID had a major impact on Parks and Recreation in a variety of ways. Our outdoor stuff got a lot more popular, but indoor stuff in particular, gyms, took a huge hit for a long time. Last time we had an in-depth conversation about this was well before things got back to normal. And so I guess across the country, are you seeing in the fitness world, in the world of fitness centers and gyms and public ones and private, whatever, people are feeling like this is back to normalcy, back to the way things were, and we are lagging behind? Or is this a new normal where gyms are a lot less popular and we are in the same boat as everybody else? Or are we now back to where we were before in terms of utilization of the space, the way it used to be prior to COVID?
Yeah, I'd have to defer to Jay in terms of normalcy, like the baseline that existed pre-2020 and what exists today in terms of usage patterns. But I will tell you in general, and this is a hot topic at the national level right now in our profession, market behavior has changed, leisure behavior has changed. People don't play like they used to. And the suggestion is we're not going back. So you'll still see things that are fads and trends, i.e. pickleball. For example, that is the hottest thing right now happening. And it's kind of crossing generations. Nobody expected that to happen. They thought it was going to be an older adult activity, and everybody's doing it. And everybody in our field's excited because it's a health and wellness activity. It's actually a good thing. It's comes with its own set of interesting issues and challenges. Alternatively, we aren't seeing things like youth sports performing as they did prior to, right? There's a trend line that's pretty aggressively moving downward. You're seeing fitness activities changing dramatically in the public sector because the private sector owns that market now. We've got an organization we've worked with on and off over the years in the West, in the state of Washington, is actually divesting of their community centers, and they're going to take the savings, the operational and capital savings, and essentially give every family that's 20% above poverty level and below a membership to those facilities, and they're anticipating saving $2 million a year. So it's like a stay tuned. In terms of Mansfield, I know that there's still a lot of interest in the center. The times I've been here, it's pretty active, but there's also some dead times I think staff have talked about where we have capacity and so on. But we're all in this world we're we're kind of on notice, like stay tuned in terms of leisure behavior. We don't know what to expect at this point. And Jay, I'm sure you can speak to the specifics of the community center in particular.
Right, so we are not back to where we were before. In terms of, we're probably operating around, last time I checked in, around between high 70s, 80% of what we used to see in terms of memberships, but the membership types have also changed. We have about, over the years, so we have about 55% of those are insurance supported memberships. We talked about that earlier, not to get sidetracked in silver sneakers, but the reality is over the years, that number has increased significantly. And that's been sort of one of my more stable membership types recently during COVID, interesting enough. So anyhow, so membership is not back where it was. I think our fiscal year goal this year was to try to get back to 93%. And not to get sidetracked on how we're attempting to do that, but we did not project getting back to 100%.
Are youth services down?
Youth services,
Is contributing? Yeah, thank you. Youth activities, are they down?
youth activities, in some categories are down. It depends on, what area you might look at, but.
Given that we're in a bus generation, have we done some comparison to look at whether we're down for real or they're just less kids?
I can't say we've taken a deep dive into that. We are off of where in some areas where we used to be.
We just went from millennials to the bus generation. So, I mean, it'd be good to know whether they're just less, whether we could get more kids or whether they're just in fact less kids together.
Okay.
How about the after-school programs? Are they growing, shrinking, stable?
They've ticked up. So if you talk about strictly before and after school program, during the school year and not summer camps, that number has come back a little bit. It is down from probably our highest levels, maybe 4 or 5 years back, but that might be potentially reflective of a couple of things, number of kids in schools. And also, we talked about this once earlier, I think a little bit, which is the reality that some families face with the kind of, I guess, relooking at the fee waiver policy. So tweaking that policy a number of years back. At one point, we know it was unsustainable. I believe was what how the town looked upon that. And when we pulled way back on that, it really, the cap for that program in specific, actually it's a cap for the year, but that's where we saw a big hit, was that families were really struggling to make decisions based on the cap. It's like $2,600 for a family of 8, half of that for a family of 4 per year. And so that you can chew through that pretty quickly if you're a family that needs care before and after school care. So that's another factor that contributed.
Just as a big picture thing, that's the exact sort of thing that I would like to hear about when it's happening. That if we've set something that is causing damage to families or is causing hardship that we thought was going to work, if there are families struggling that in real time to know that we messed up and we need to rethink it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we hear. And a perfect example is between summer. We've all been there. So I guess I know that the way I would look at that is it was something that appeared to be unsustainable a number of years back. There wasn't really a lot of parameters on what it could be used for and what there was no cap. And so there needed to be some way we're looking at that. And so like, several things, sometimes, you pull back and or you tweak something, it's not enough or it's too much. So we are getting, that is one consistent feedback we get, and we haven't done any scientific research on it necessarily, but we do definitely hear, for example, I have to, difficulty to choose between summer care and school care, because those caps are, burn through those pretty quickly, as I just mentioned. So I think that's a real thing. I can't say it's for all families. Not all families use 5 day a week of care. Some use 1 or 2 days, some use just afternoon. We would have to do it, research that more for you, but it certainly is something that we hear from people about, is the struggle around, just as I mentioned. So.
Jamie, are we asking anything like the right kinds of questions? I don't mean that that's not a softball. This is are we headed in the right, are our heads in the right place on this? Are we getting too detailed? What are your honest thoughts? If you're sitting at the bar, what are you telling your?
May I defer that question until a bit later in the
I was
presentation?
hoping you could. Help
But
that
I'm sure
direction.
you won't allow us to leave this evening without getting an answer to that. So I think as we kind of guide you through some additional information and share some data, we can come back to that. And I think it'll be framed a little differently. So.
The next section, we're just going to briefly touch upon the capital improvement plan that we currently have in place. Our capital improvement plan over the next 5 years has $1.857 million going to Parks and Recreation, which is on average around $371,000. And this includes just general capital repairs that we're anticipating over the next 5 years.
Does not include, it's in the footnote there, but just want to point out the council voted, you supported the recommendation to, at the time, it was $750,000 for Parks and Rec asset improvements. That number, because you've appropriated some of that money down for various projects, so it's about 587,000 now. So just to be clear, that annual average, that's just the money that would come from our regular capital non-recurring fund. It's not the special one-time ARPA funds, which is separate.
And I also want to point out that some of these payments, like the regular $50,000 for playground replacement, is to build an account that can be used for a large expenditure at some point. Oh, all of these have very specific projects in mind, whether it's a savings account or a specific expenditure. And it's all in the budget document.
Yeah, so we wanted to share this with you because I think it's a great foundation for the next few slides and some additional information that I think brings this to brings it to a place where we can begin to, I think, Chris, to your point, a place of where do we go from here, essentially. I want to emphasize again that total for 5 years, average annually is $371,000. What I'm going to share with you next, I think is critically important to this conversation.
Can I just ask a detailed question?
Sure.
Sorry. You've got our FY24 budget, which has park amenities at 50,000, and then it pretty steadily ramps up. And so half of this money easy is generally improvement of park amenities, lots of money every year. So what kind of stuff are we talking about here? Is this kind of some of the wish list project things that we had seen as part of our budget process that are kind of supplemental to this ARPA money, or like what kind of things go into a projection that will spend $240,000 in 26 and 27 on improving park amenities?
Right. So that's a combination of both maintaining what we have as well as trying to anticipate, knowing that we had the master planning process coming up, anticipate things like that was mentioned at one of the council meetings, a dog park. That's not to say that we're welded to that, but just trying to think ahead to, hey, we need to maintain and we need to and improve. Like the pond's a good example of up there too is another piece of what's improvement. It's not in that 150, but it's sort of mentioned as another improvement out there. So a combination of both improvements and what those new things may be. There's also some ADA things that we knew that we very clearly that need to be addressed. That's also in that number. And as you'll see, it was very light in terms of a number.
So we wanted to bring this forward because again, oftentimes when you talk budget, we focus on operations and we forget about the capital investment that needs to be made. And we're talking about a system that has 9 figures in total value with less than $2 million distributed towards capital in a 5-year window. I'm going to share a little context, some information that I think you'll find quite interesting that resulted from a study that Penn State University's Park and Recreation and Tourism Studies Department led as a result of the last recession. And it's become a bit of a keystone conversation for us in this world, in the local park and recreation world. And it speaks to capital. It speaks to capital and our investment choices in public parks and recreation. And Chris, again, I think you'll find this in particular interesting and connected to your ask earlier. If we go back in time to 2000, this particular study, by the way, you see it on the bottom right there, was the Great Recession's profound impact on parks and recreation. It was released actually in December of 2017, and it is online if you'd like to dive into it a little bit more. Our total expenditures at the local level in public parks and recreation were $35.5 billion. And you can see the distribution into the operating side of the fence in contrast to capital. And just to clarify, capital is our physical assets, our capital investments. Okay. Okay. Well, we can talk about it later. I'm curious what you'd recommend because this is right from the study. So. You're talking about the size of the graph? Again, I think it's a formatting issue, so I appreciate that feedback. Okay, I will suggest again, it's a formatting issue and I appreciate the feedback. Okay, thank you. So you'll see here in 2008, we were accelerating investments in public parks and recreation. We're building a significant amount of infrastructure. Government had a lot of resources and we then obviously invested more in our park and recreation systems. And you can see the delineation or the differentiation between our operating investments and our capital investments. But I want you to notice that we're putting more of the bucket, if you will, into the operating side of the fence and less into capital in terms of percent of the whole. And then in 2013, as a result of the recession, 2007, 8, 9, we saw a pretty significant decrease in our funding and our investments. Yet at the same time, we put more of our bucket into the operating side of the fence and less into capital. This has contributed to a nationwide infrastructure crisis in public parks and recreation. We have built and we've not been able to maintain. And so this is the Penn State team that's doing this. Andy Mowen, Dr. Andy Mowen from Penn State's been leading this effort. He actually was a 20-year practicing professional turned professor. He's one of the few that focuses on management and administration of public systems. They're now doing an update relative to 2022. All indications are that this is going to look a little bit worse, if you will. We're putting less into our infrastructure and more into the operating side of the fence to maintain our service levels. It's been hugely problematic for us. So we're trying to keep our service.
Do we map onto this? Is that, do we do the same thing?
I'm going to show you in a moment how this connects to Mansfield. So all indications are 2022, we're seeing less of the bucket being invested in our capital. And that's become problematic. Again, it's contributed to some really interesting case studies across the country of systems that have been prolific over the years that are currently struggling. So if we connect the dots to Mansfield, you can see if we use your 2023 operating figure of 2.5 million based on what we know and the contributions that we were able to account for out of public works, in contrast to your capital investment average over the next 5 years, you're actually putting 13% of the whole into capital and 87% into operating. So it becomes a bit compelling, right? It begins to help tell a story about the investments you're making into your infrastructure. And again, you have an incredible, robust, high value system. And on average, you're going to be putting $300,000 a year. So the question for you and for the entire community really is, what investment do you want to make in taking care of your assets? And is what you are directing there going to be sufficient in terms of the high value system that you have?
Can I ask a process
Please.
question? Just to make it visual for myself in terms of, let's use trails, because that's not Silver Sneakers. But capital would be to build new trails, right? Operating would be to maintain the existing trails.
Depending on the threshold for the investment. Yes, if it's preventative maintenance, ongoing maintenance, it typically falls into operating.
Perfect.
If they're larger investments, then it's going to fall on the capital side of the fence.
Thank you.
So, yeah, great question. So as we look at this information and this data, it takes us to some preliminary findings we have realized as a result of a part of the master plan, which was the ADA access audit. Some of you, I think, came to the public meeting. I know, Mayor, you actually had a chance to meet our principal, John McGovern. Just so you're aware, John McGovern is a national expert in ADA. He actually trains the DOJ on ADA compliance. So it's quite special to have him as part of this team. But he and his team have led the ADA access audit for the town of Mansfield. Preliminarily, what we have been presented with, and actually I got additional information from John and Tatum yesterday, you're looking at over a 7 to 10 year window, a $13 million investment based on a 7.5 CPI. If you then add that obviously to the plan that's in place, the $1.8 million plan that's in place for the next 5 years, it's something to contend with. It's something to consider. It's something that we'll have to deliberate and discuss, and we'll be building in these numerics into your master plan. But a question certainly for this council will be, how are we going to address our ADA compliance issues? There will be a number of strategies in there included, but I wanted to let you know that this is a bit of a lesson learned, a takeaway thus far in the process, and how it marries with and also kind of conflicts with the capital investment plan that's in place currently. So I'm going to pause here just for a moment because it's a bit to digest. See if you have any questions or comments.
I guess my question about this is, what's the sort of scope, as in like breadth of what you're looking at in terms of ADA compliance? So we have 3 images here. One of them is an image of a basketball court that's clearly not accessible to someone in a wheelchair. The other ones are images of our trails and
That's the boat launch area that's supposed to be accessible.
boat launch at
River Plains Road.
at Plains Road, and then a trail was never meant to be handicap accessible and is not. And so is it an investment plan to make all of, our entire trail system ADA compliant, or is it an investment plan to just ensure compliance across areas of the town that should be compliant based
Sure.
on all standards?
I will do my best as the non-ADA expert to share with you my takeaways from John's conversation and the preliminary report I've seen. So the majority of that $13 million is your trail system. 12 million of the 13 million are your trails. It also includes employee office spaces being accessible. It includes playgrounds being accessible. It includes outdoor courts being accessible. So it's a broad scope to the entire system, but your biggest pain point, if you will, are your trails. There's a phased plan in place. Essentially, what can you get, what's low hanging fruit to allow you to come into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act that we will be presenting to you. It's like small bites, right? Recognizing that this is out of reach in the short term.
So this number is however many miles of trail we have in town, blasting through it all to essentially create it and make it ADA accessible.
No, what you're trying to
this
do is
is-
just meet the standard.
Which
The
is-
standard is not to make every trail hard surface where everyone would be able to access it. It's a minimum number of miles within your trail system. It's certain trailheads. So there are some basic requirements that you'll want to meet, and that will all be
Right
drawn
now
out
we
in the
have
transition plan.
2 of small parks out of a large park network. And so
Right.
we're nowhere near that.
Yeah,
benchmark.
and there's
Got
some
it.
strategies around what's reasonable accommodation in terms of investment, in terms of construction. What can you do reasonably in contrast to maybe acquiring a space that might allow for accessibility. So I will say this, and I didn't say this at the beginning of the slide, and I apologize because I wanted to say this early. Kudos to you. Most systems wait until they've got a lawsuit on their hands to do this work. So you're taking, you're pulling the curtain back to see what we're dealing with. And I think that's incredibly important and noble. And it can feel overwhelming, but there are strategies, Ben, to your point about let's see what we can tackle in the immediate to do what we can to come into compliance. And not being the AD expert, I can share some things with you, but it will be outlined in detail in the transition plan.
And my question is, where are these? I'm very familiar with law around around ADA.
Mhm.
In terms of things like trails, where is the law being established, or is this where is best practices being established?
I'm not sure I follow your question. What do you mean?
Well, is it because of previous lawsuits? Is it people in the industry have decided that this is the best way to do it? Is it disability advocacy groups? How do we know, like, where is the standard for what is reasonable?
If I could jump in, I think as a lawyer, what's being asked is the standard in which this report sounds like it's gonna have. How is that standard developed?
So,
If I.
Yes, thank you.
yeah, and again, I am not the AD expert, which is why we hired an ADA expert. So I'm not sure I can tell you exactly where those standards derive from. But the original Americans with Disabilities Act was the driver and the principal driver in the standards that were created. We've got obviously our own compliance standards within local government and local park and recreation systems, and those will be part of the transition plan and will be outlined for you so you can see what those are and then how that compares and contrasts to what the recommendations are for the town of Mansfield.
Sadly, the ADA has had far less bite than we all thought it would have in 1990.
Very much so.
And has not made the changes in the world that were expected. So that's why I'm curious about
Sure.
what, of course, we want to go beyond the ADA. We don't want necessarily that to be our bar. We want to make the community as inclusive as possible, but in the same breath, we want to know how we're establishing the bar
course.
and where the ideas are coming from, to make sure that we're not spending money inappropriately and that we're spending it in the right places.
Absolutely. And just so you know, John McGovern will be here to present the transition plan as part of the master plan to you. So he will be the person to direct some of these more specific questions to, and I'm no doubt he'll be able to respond. So obviously, this begins to, I think, shed light on the capital investment challenges that are ahead and, how this fits within the context, constructs, framework of the overall financial sustainability strategy. And I just want to share this with you. Big capital letter example, but one thing we will be doing as part of the plan, and it will be incorporated in the transition plan in particular, is the compounding exercise. Again, clarifying what the investment would need to be today, if it's carried over a 5, 7, 10-year period, what the compounding will look like and what it will translate to in terms of total dollars. We'll be using likely a 7.5% rate because that's really the going rate now for construction in public parks and recreation. However, we want to take into consideration we're in the northeast part of the country, we're in the state of Connecticut, and what that rate should be will be built into the analysis as well. So I just wanted to assure you that, it's going to say X number of dollars, but we're going to be thinking about that over a period of time, recognizing you're not going to be able to make that investment in this next year or even in the next couple of years.
Jamie, you just said, I believe, the word that caught me was transition. I think you said transition plan.
Mhm.
Is that what you're calling your deliverable
For the
transition plan?
ADA compliance, yes, it's a ADA transition plan, and that's an industry standard,
Okay.
I would suggest. Yeah. So any thoughts, comments relative to the capital conversation, the capital presentation?
I guess a question. So we built the community center 20 years ago, a major facility. We're a small town, one that you wouldn't expect to have multiple community centers where you would be turning them over and replacing them, one of them every few years. That building's got it's our newest public building on the town side, I think. Well, the school is on the school
Yeah,
side,
I
but
mean, Leonard Hall is totally renovated, but in terms of
yeah,
yeah.
the newest
You're-
from scratch building. So
Yes.
when you're looking at all these other communities and showing the sort of capital investments is a big driver in the decrease that beginning in the Great Recession, towns just stopped building stuff like this. And so part of the reason or a major reason that the capital is declining is because people stop building big new community centers with pools and senior centers and all that fun stuff. Is it that governments really stopped maintaining their facilities and let them sort of fall into ruin?
I would say the latter.
And I would say I would wager the same in as far as our capital budget, like it would be in other municipalities. What we're showing is pay as you go. It's not what we're bonding for. So the big projects you're talking about, you're going to be bonding for, and that shows up in the debt service, not so much in your cash CIP program. And so I think it's the numbers you're seeing in that pullback in the capital programs is basically just letting deferred maintenance go, letting things go to seed.
And recognizing that these are not small town examples. However, they're examples that are they're being used often today as part of the infrastructure conversation in, again, this space. Austin, Texas, major municipality, highly prolific, a very reputable park and rec system. It's one of the fastest growing parts of the country, continues to be. They've gone from a population of 600,000 about 12, 13 years ago to now one over 2 million, their major metropolitan area. The public park and recreation system in the city of Austin has just announced they have $1.3 billion in maintenance backlog with a B. They have 50 aquatic facilities, spray ground, splash pads, aquatic facilities, pools, Barton Springs, hot springs, if you've ever been down there. The average age is 50 years. Build, grow was their mantra for a long time, and they weren't investing in their infrastructure, the existing infrastructure. Milwaukee County Parks and Rec System, $500 million. Portland, Oregon, $500 million. Cincinnati just came out, said $74 million. Systems are paying attention more than they ever have. So Ben, it's a really good question, but we're acknowledging we built because we had the money and we said, we got the construction dollars, but we're not thinking about how we're going to maintain this thing over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever the life cycle is. There's a sensibility and a higher, I think, heightened level of responsibility today. So it's not just the operating budget we talk about, it's also our infrastructure because it's a cost of doing business. So it's a good question. And it's become a hot button issue in our world.
The message is stop building, just for the record.
I hate to interrupt. I have childcare concerns. I'm gonna still sign in so I can still participate through Zoom, but I didn't want you to think I'm leaving because of the 13 million. Thank you for the presentation so far, and go Buffs.
All
It's
right.
interesting also, though, when you show when you make the comparisons of what operating versus capital, the reluctance during pullbacks to drop staff can inflate or at least maintain to a much greater degree that side of the budget. And so it can kind of, it pushes your argument harder, but I don't know if it pushes it more accurately.
I think that's a really great point. We talk often about government's investment in maintaining employees, keeping people employed in communities. Is that government's responsibility? That's a common discussion. Alternatively, I will tell you, probably in the last 10 years of this work. We do a lot of service analysis work as well. We're starting to talk service diets with systems because they've overextended themselves. It's not uncommon to have systems on average have more than 50% of their service menu being offered to a community when they're not meeting their minimums. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you've got a yoga class where you can accommodate 20 people and your minimum is 10 from an efficiencies
talked about
perspective, and you're offering it for 3 or 4 or 5 people. And so there's a bigger question, right, around what are we spending our money on? And is it the most sound, logical, defensible, responsible way to invest our subsidies?
Mhm.
So staffing it's a big question mark, and concern. Yeah. All right, would you all like to take a quick break or should we continue to power through? Okay, all right. So I'm just going to put this up to set the stage for the next part of our content, and we're going to get into some of the details of the data analysis. We'll keep it rather high level, but I also want to begin to share with you some of the results. You may recall the beneficiary of service exercise you participated in last we met. This was the result of your contributions as council, obviously as elected officials and elected representatives of the community. We also had the professional staff participate in the exercise along with a representative group of board and committee members. And what you see on the screen is a representation, a hybrid representation of all of the feedback we received. You can see the ranking again. The intention was to rank, not prioritize your categories from those in the bottom left that aligned more with the definition of common good, and those in the top right being more exclusive in nature. So I wanted to set the stage with this as we get into the data, because this was the first iteration and is the first iteration of the strategy. Yet, as you can imagine, we're missing the objective part of this, which is the data. And so I wanted to, again, set the stage here. The intention of these beneficiary of service models is to begin to create a bit of a roadmap relative to where subsidy investments should be made in contrast to where less subsidy, if any, would be made. And of course, we subsidize our common good services with less investment, if any, in our exclusive services, maybe even using those as an opportunity to generate excess revenues to reinvest in the system. So I want to connect the dots here. Again, if you look back at this image, you can see the progression of the categories. And now we're going to translate those categories or transition those categories onto a bar graph. And this bar graph is a high-level dashboard bar graph as part of our work and the cost of service work, where you see your categories listed on the bottom, those on the left being at the bottom of the continuum, those on the right being at the top right of the continuum. And what you see in red, well, let me back up a moment. The light blue bar represents your current performance in terms of revenue, and the darker bar represents 100% cost recovery. So that's the default here for this evening. So the red represents the gap, right? The subsidy investment that's being made into every one of these categories. And keep in mind, we have a number of different services within each category. So on the far left, of course, open access, your parks, your trails, your open spaces, self-directed activity. I can go sit on a park bench, walk my dog. I don't need any supervision, oversight. All the way to the far right, which are your resale items, you know, your vending machine items and so on, and then everything in between. So I wanted to start here so you can see the subsidies being directed to these categories. What is clearly in conflict, if you will, on the screen is you've got heavy subsidy in some of the services that tend to be more exclusive in nature. And so this is something that the council will want to contend with, is again, the question around where do you want to put your subsidies in order to have the greatest impact? Alternatively, do you want to direct your subsidies to those service lines that align more with the common good and less, if any, investment in those services that tend to be more exclusive?
So can I ask a question? So this is another weird visual graph in terms, because the dollar amounts don't line up with the size of the bars. So there's some things with huge subsidies like special events, but actually we're only spending 10
Yeah.
grand on them. And
Right.
so that
Well,
makes sense.
This is a software, so.
Right. No, I understand. So my question though, just to put like actual things that we're doing into these categories, which don't make sense entirely to me, but we talked at length about them at our last meeting. Something like skill-based intermediate advanced activities would be the classes that are offered at the community center for yoga or swim class level 4
More
or
advanced.
or
correct.
art classes or those kinds of things.
Correct.
And rental, so that's a one with a big subsidy.
Mhm.
Rentals would be the ball fields for
Correct.
soccer and Little League.
Correct.
Primary, my guess is that's the primary driver there, since that's
That's
the cost of mowing those fields based on what Public Works has told
Yep.
us.
Yep.
And does full recovery include public works costs?
The ones we've currently accounted for. So the ones that Amanda mentioned earlier, the
Yes.
200 plus. Yes.
Where is the parts of the community center that are covered by its membership?
So membership services like drop-in, I want to go lap swim, those are in drop-in activities. So that would be the 5th category. And keep in mind, the community center is a host. It's not a service in and of itself. It's an expense of the system. The services offered in the center are the services that are identified as part of these categories.
But when, to continue our earlier conversation, when I have a family membership to the community center, I can drop in and go swim or lift weights or play basketball, and that's a
Correct.
drop-in activity.
Correct.
But I can also participate in a skill-based introductory or a skill-based intermediate class at a discount.
Mhm.
And the same applies to a varying degree. I know we've sort of tweaked how much.
Mhm.
If I'm a retiree on a Medicare Advantage plan from the state with a Silver Sneakers plan that I swipe, we get our $7 up to 28 a
Mhm.
month or 22 a month, whatever it is. And I can go and swim, or I can go and take a yoga class at the same member discount or whatever. And so we're subsidizing my $37 a month for my family to go is more than the same person who has a retirement benefit is paying for the same service, but they're happening in sort of different places along this continuum. So that's
Right, because they're different services.
Right.
So a membership that allows you to drop in and lap swim is a drop-in activity. If I register for a class, that's going to be in potentially skill-based introductory or skill-based advanced, depending on what the class is.
What
Right?
are-
If I hire a personal trainer, it's going to be in private, semi-private.
So private,
activities.
semi-private activities is something like a personal training
Mhm.
service, or give me another example.
Jay, what do you think?
Music lessons.
So let me get into the further details, because I'm going to share with you now the 15 services furthest from 100% cost recovery. That's not good. That's not bad. It's just the 15 services that are furthest from cost recovery, because you're going to see services that are in open access, right? And the suggestion is you would heavily subsidize that anyway. But of all the services offered by the town of Mansfield Park and Recreation Department, these are the 15 that kind of percolated to the top in terms of highest subsidy investment. And it's where you have the opportunity to have the biggest impact in terms of the bottom line, if you so choose, right? And these are presented to every system that we work with.
Just a quick question, where are the after-school activities? Pre and post,
Education and enrichment.
okay.
So we make money on the after school and before school and summer camp programs overall. It's the only places we're showing a profit.
We make some profit there that goes back into the system, yes.
That's the place I'd least like to make profit. It's completely upside down.
And that
we have no-
service category aligns with the common good,
Yeah, But,
right?
but
Are we overcharging? For the market?
so what this is not telling, it's not explaining the why underneath it. Like, why is it that that clearly we're doing something wrong with education and enrichment, but is it that not enough people are who should be paying tuition are paying their membership fees?
Well,
Or is it another reason?
I think there are a number of considerations here. If you allow me, I'll share with you some of the details, and then I'm sure that's going to trigger some conversation. This is where we probably will ignite the senior or silver sneakers conversation, as well as some of the sports rentals as well.
And I would like to say that education and enrichment, if it's bringing in money, that's wonderful. And people are getting a greater value. It's just like if I sell you something which doesn't cost me as much to produce as it would cost you to produce, but you sure do like it, then you're getting a good value and so am I. And I think that's what's happening there.
I think one of our concerns is we may be pricing low and moderate income families out of
understand.
the market.
I understand.
And that may be the
But
group
there
that
may
we
be a
are
way to
more interested.
differentiate the
Yeah.
pricing rather than just wholesale.
Well, we have,
Ultimate.
that's the fee waiver issue, I think.
Mhm.
So let's move on and see
Yeah.
where we come.
We're half the
And I'll
price of the
just
other
touch
camp.
on that ever so briefly. When we get into policy, pricing strategies are a part of that. And if you have a population, this is hypothetical, if you have a population that has an ability to pay and you're very interested in helping those who can't, they have an ability to pay, or they don't have an ability to pay, they may have a willingness, but I can't, then you not necessarily want to price to the lowest common denominator. You want to price at the price point that the market will bear or makes sense or is responsible. That allows you to save subsidy and direct subsidy to needs-based assistance or reduced rates for those families who need help. So we typically recommend you price at the appropriate and reasonable price point to the market, and then you save the subsidies for those families and individuals who need help to be able to access the service, rather than making it affordable for everyone. We're pricing it responsibly, and again, it lessens the burden on the general fund. and the
If
subsidy.
if I could, just not to further go down that hole, but just keep in mind that education enrichment activities, when I mentioned make money, I was talking as a whole. That includes very specific things like, Lego camp, which is priced pretty heavily, it's a very, it's not it's a specialized activity that is not necessarily doubled up as childcare. We offer it 1 week out of the summer. It's priced at a pretty decent premium, different than summer camp or after school program. So collectively, that category makes money. When you talk about, the direct fees associated with that program. So
I just
make
wanted
sure I was
to jump in
clear.
and say childcare isn't discretionary. Childcare is a fundamental need by families, and that we look at it from that perspective, not from how much can we get away with charging just because people manage to pony up. When we think about what families, they have to pay for childcare, what they're not able to pay for, like maybe going to something really enriching like Lego camp. I mean, I think that that I'm on a soapbox, so I'll shut up. I do think it's important. I mean, the reason we should prioritize those sort of things as not money makers, but as essential services is really important.
It makes sense to me to see that number. It's by and large, the services that we offer in the educational space as a Parks and Rec department utilize existing town facilities that are already being maintained, whose maintenance costs are being accounted for in other parts of the budget, whether it's the community center in the morning, the school in the afternoon, or the middle school for the summer camp, or the community center for some of the more specialized summer camps. And to my knowledge, and maybe this is wrong, but with the exception of the management of those camps, we're largely employing high school students and people without a need to have an educational certification or other things to work in, the person running Lego camp's not a certified teacher, doesn't have to be a certified teacher the way someone working in a childcare center would have to be if we were running an early childhood education program, the way the school obviously employs teachers. And so it makes sense because we charge, compared to the market, no one looks at Mansfield camps and says, oh man, this is more expensive than all these other camps down the road. We're half the price of the other summer camp in town by week, for the same amount of time that your kid is there during the day and a similar activity, array for the most part. But it makes sense, right? The counselors are generally kids in high school and college who are doing a summer camp job, and so aren't at the higher end of the town's income scale in terms of their salaries. And so
I think we're getting into the meat of the problem. So can we
Yeah.
keep going?
All right, so I'm going to go through these and I'm happy to come back, but please allow me to get through the 15 and then we can always toggle back to any of these slides. So these are again, as a result of the first cost of service analysis, the 15 services that are furthest away from their target, and the target right now, because goals have not been set, is 100% cost recovery. As I know you all know, I say it often, cost recovery is not a bad thing. It's just recovering costs. We're not generating a profit. There's no excess revenues here. So the default is 100% cost recovery. But what that allows us to do for this preliminary dashboard is show the subsidy investment in each of these services. So you see the service on the left and then the category. I showed you the categories earlier in the bar graph. So you see the category in which the service lives. Okay. So the first service furthest away from its cost recovery target again, 100% is Parks and Trail open access. It's all the way to the left on your continuum, furthest down, right? Aligns most with the common good. Open access, the revenue discrepancy between performance and target is $180,195. Second is WHAM soccer field use. It falls in the rentals category, and the cost, the subsidy investment is $103,000. You can see private lessons in the private, semi-private activities category, that total. We see silver sneakers relative to pool use, which is 40% of the total. Drop in activities, that fourth or fifth category over from the left, at $87,000. And then we have baseball rental, field rental at $64,000. Again, I'll go through the 15 and then we can always toggle back if there's one in particular that's of interest. Then we have memberships for the pools. That's in drop-in at 58.9. The BCP recreation area is in open access at 53,000. Personal training, again, another private, semi-private activities category service at 43. Silver sneakers, gym and court use and drop-in at 37.4. Music lessons that are private at 32,000. Memberships for the gym and court drop-in at 31.8. Lacrosse rentals at 29,000. Silver sneakers for the fitness center at 17 plus. Then the Renew Active program specific to the pools drop in at 15,000. And then the MCC sitting room, the computer lab free space at 15,238. Keep in mind, we have accounted for direct as well as indirect expenses, meaning the cost associated with operating the facility. If the particular activity or service uses any specific part of the facility, we're looking at the attribution of the expense based upon percent of the whole, if you will, and the particular space that's used being attributed to that service as well, because it's all part of the cost of doing business. So these are the 15 services that are, if you will, furthest away from 100% cost recovery. These are the poorer performers, and you see that it would take $864,715 to get them all to 100% cost recovery. So essentially eliminating those discrepancies.
Well, the field rental jumps out at us, and you got two of them up there, WHAM and baseball, fields there. That said, just add that at one time Park and Recreation used to run the baseball program, and we didn't do much else in the spring. And there was no fall program, and there was no summer program because we couldn't contribute resources. So I just footnote that it is a big number that jumped out, but there's some value there, but we don't charge them. So that's a maybe you're just make sure everybody's aware. There's a Town of Mansfield co-sponsorship agreement, which includes basically free access to those co-sponsorship organizations to those fields. So the number that's in that you're seeing there includes what we would be getting if we were charged our rental rate, is my understanding anyhow, and as well as the Public Works number that was put out there.
So wait, can you explain that for a second? So we're seeing $170,000 here, and then there's an additional slide with rental for the lacrosse program, which is also privately run, correct? And so the numbers that we're seeing here is the biggest driver of the cost is the there's the public works maintenance of the fields being prorated across these three uses. We're talking primarily the baseball fields and softball fields at Southeast, and the other handful of them are in town, and then the soccer fields at Lions Club Field that are also used for lacrosse, correct?
Right. If I hearing you right, yeah, there's Southeast Park, of course, a few
Sunny Acres.
Sunny Acre, right?
Spring Hill, those other places,
Exactly.
and then the Lions Club
and then
fields for
Lions Club.
soccer. So this is not the Farrell Field's owned by O. Smith. It's not included in this.
No,
Okay, and then the numbers we're seeing here are Public Works, whatever nominal costs your department has in the fields, but primarily Public Works, and then an amount of money that if we charged a rental rate for them, which we do not and have never, we would be receiving. So we're showing a revenue loss because we're not charging rent that
I
doesn't
believe- I
exist. Is
believe
that
that's
correct?
Basically using our stated
is that
rate.
correct? I believe that's how it's worked.
We have a stated rate that we're not charging. This revenue assumption is based on a rate that we have. Right, but the revenue, because we're not assigning a fee, we have a fee that we're kind of waiving essentially. So you're basing this number on our fee. You're not saying that that fee is appropriate one way or the other. You're just saying if we charge what we have on the books.
Do
this
we
is-
have a fee on the books? I think
We have
what Jay has been saying,
there is a fee, but it doesn't apply according to the town's co-sponsorship policy that was created many years back, but that's what the policy, how it reads.
so there was a fee at the time that was assigned?
While for example, maybe a little better explanation is if you're not a co-sponsorship organization
Right.
and you wanted to rent a field, we charge those organizations, like UConn is a good example. They'll come over, they want to use a field. If we can provide it, we charge them $50
Right.
per use, which is a whole nother just conversation, but
It's certainly not going to cover these numbers.
So I have
Right,
a specific question about this. It's my second season of Little League, and I've noticed there's a lot of kids who aren't from Mansfield. And it may just be the age that my stepson is, where his particular cohort, there's a lot of kids from Ashford that like baseball, and there's a lot of kids from Mansfield that don't. But the chant yesterday was "Go Ashford," and which is fine. But the breakdown, it's roughly, I mean, less than half of the kids are from Mansfield, and there's about a quarter from Willington, about a quarter from Ashford. All of the games, as long as they aren't filled and then they move into Ashford, are at Southeast. Many of the practices are, certainly Southeast is a much nicer facility than Ashford Park. Ashford Park doesn't have an infield right now because they didn't do anything to it between May and now. So it's full of grass. And Willington doesn't have a field whatsoever that the Little League uses, as far as I know, but their taxpayers are obviously benefiting from it. My guess is WHAM, which stands for Willington, Ashford, Mansfield, is in a very similar situation. Maybe the proportions aren't the same. Do the towns of Willington or Ashford contribute at all to the existence of the youth sports programs that serve their residents? Have they ever? Has anyone ever asked? Is there any, I know for the volunteers that run at least the Little League, interaction with all of the towns is a particular challenge, that there's always concerns. Oh, they're not mowing them enough. The fields are in horrible shape and we're getting in trouble. The town's mad at us because nobody locked the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. That always happens. But from a governmental perspective, has anybody ever said to the first selectman of Willington or Ashford, Mansfield paying for your kids to do these sports by and large? Are you contributing anything financially to them, and how can we change that?
Yes and no. I guess in terms of the percentages, I don't want to quote an exact percentage. I can tell you that annually they have to, all the co-sponsorship organizations have to apply. And within that application process is a roster which shows the breakdown. So it is still heavily Mansfield. I can't tell you by the team. It could be true that a particular team might have more from a different town, I suppose. But the rosters that we get annually show majority are from Mansfield for the programs. That's the criteria of the co-sponsorship. As far as other field use, yes, we've been applying some gentle pressure. A good example of that also was last year, I believe, when our irrigation system was down at Lions Club Field. We did not have the rain we had this summer, and we could not use those fields without trashing them or, basically damaging those fields for a long period of time. So we had some conversations with other towns about kind of stepping up, that said, not sure it's gone far enough. And maybe in those conversations probably should continue, but there has been some conversations around that very subject, both with the co-sponsorship boards, as well as, with the other town department, recreation departments. So to answer your question.
Does, I think. My second question then is on to the community center. So there's a number of all 4 of the sort of membership, gym membership categories here are listed, both full member pool and gym and Silver Sneakers pool and gym all appear on this top 15 list in some form or fashion. And so we've always based our membership rates on what we think the market will bear. And it's been a challenge to find comps because most facilities here don't have a pool. So we have to go to Ellington for the Y there and some other places. But anyway, is the way to read this on the full membership side that we don't have enough members to meet the costs of maintaining the facility? That's why they're continue to be subsidized when you separate Silver Sneakers out? Or is there a different way to kind of look at it? Like, if, for example, Silver Sneakers wasn't there, a certain number of people bought a full membership, would the numbers that are on this list that are the membership numbers reverse themselves?
I'm gonna let maybe Jay speak to this in more detail, but just to, I think, address the first question I heard you ask. So the issue, as I understand it, and Jay can correct me if I'm wrong, but the anomaly, the challenge that has emerged with Silver Sneakers is not the number of members, Silver Sneaker members. It's that in lieu of being a Silver Sneakers member, people paid a rate to be a member, and you paid that regardless of actual usage. But then when you're in Silver Sneakers, we receive a payment, $3 a swipe, right? So since somebody's not paying a membership, and again, they're paying a flat amount, whether they use it or not, we're getting a payment, which is basically discounted to begin with, but that's neither here nor there for the purpose of this discussion. But we receive less money if there's less usage. So if somebody only uses, 3 swipes a month, that's $9 that we would collect as opposed to whatever we would have been collecting otherwise. And so you can have on the books like as many or twice as many Silver Sneakers members as you had in the before times, before we had the program, but we're collecting a lot less revenue because the actual usage is down as it is.
Right, I understand that. I guess my question is, if we canceled, if we opted out of the Silver Sneakers program, we have a large number of state employee retirees who primarily make up, I'm assuming, but it's probably a pretty educated assumption, make up the bulk of the folks on the particular Medicare Advantage plan in town that utilizes Silver Sneakers. A number of them, not all certainly, but a number would purchase, those who use our services currently. Many of them would probably purchase a membership like many of them held before we participated in this program. If that happened successfully, quote unquote, from a financial perspective, at least, would the top 15 here go away? There's the 2 categories we're subsidizing the membership too here. We're not just subsidizing the Silver Sneakers program. And so if we drop Silver Sneakers and converted a mass of those folks to full membership, would we cease subsidizing the pool and gym usage for full members, or would it continue to not meet the costs of delivering the service? Right.
We don't know until, I will say, you wouldn't know. Well, we have no idea. If it's a price elasticity exercise, you'd have to change the rate. You'd have to eliminate the program and see what your retention rate would be.
Plug in the yearly rate for adults to all of those folks who are using it as Medicare, through their Medicare Advantage plan, and we get a number.
Yeah, we could do a
very
basic math
seriously,
exercise.
I very seriously doubt
Why
whether,
not?
because it's an extra $300 or $400 a year, and there are gonna be lots of people who say, I don't have $300 or $400 a year to pay for recreation.
But there's an equity issue here.
I understand the equity
so-
issue,
so,
but the question is, if you did this, what would be the consequence? And I strongly believe that you would lose. You could not retain you couldn't retain a quarter
But
of the
we're-
Silver
we're
Sneakers
bearing-
members.
This is being borne on the backs of everybody else in the community.
I understand, but when it comes down to writing your check, the likelihood of your willingness to contribute to the good of the community evaporates very quickly in the face of your own bank account.
But could a market analysis be done
That's
to
the
make a
question.
prediction based on the conditions of the rest of the Silver Sneaker participating gyms and other programs in the area? Whether, I don't expect we would retain everyone who's ever swiped as a Silver Sneakers member, but how many would come back or would likely come back if we made the change, and therefore what would the effect be on a revenue?
We could do
Or-
projections and we
I-
could do,
I wonder if just a really simple way to go, because projections, yeah, you could just make some guesses. But I think it might be more interesting if we had to see how many full memberships we would need to cover the current income
I
from
think
Silver Sneakers.
ballpark, Jay has done that, and I don't know, we don't,
How many is it? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it?
I thought the break even, in jail, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was somewhere in the 25 or 30%. You could,
Don't give me,
Sure.
just try it. Can you give me a number of memberships?
I could not give you that tonight. I have
Okay.
looked at that annually up until this past year, and I would want to.
Because that could become
but
your
it's-
goal. I mean, okay, we must, if we're gonna do this in terms of revenue, we've got to have so many memberships if we're giving up to Silver Sneakers. But I'd like to do a different thing with Silver Sneakers. Sorry.
Yeah.
And again, that
No,
was
no, no,
just
that-
a,
but it's a really great conversation because this connects to the education and enrichment activity. What are your common good services? Where do you want to invest your subsidies in order to have a community impact? And is it your older adults because it's cost containment and you want to continue to keep them healthy? Is it, we believe that childcare needs to be the area where we're going to invest? I mean, these are the bigger philosophical conversations that are not easy to answer. And in terms of the Silver Sneakers, I think, if you use a 25 or 30% retention rate, could easily do the math exercise, but we don't know the results of price elasticity, because if you do that, are you going to get 25% retention? Or are you going to get 5% retention?
Yeah.
We don't know that, but you could do the math exercise and say, if then, but
I
until you
would-
make the call.
I have a thought, Jay, when Silver Sneakers came in, a lot of people of my generation switched their membership from full paying membership to Silver Sneakers. What percentage of your full paying membership made that switch?
I do not have that answer. I know that it was a significant dollar amount. I want to say well over 100,000, maybe approaching 200,000. But again, I don't have, I could find it out for you. I
My
just don't have
my
it.
guess is you couldn't get all of those people back for a
Oh,
number of
sure.
reasons. One of them is they aged out over this period of time. Some of them were 75 then, and now they're 85 or 80. And I mean, because we've been through COVID and a whole bunch of other things. But also, I think that seniors are feeling fear of the economy even more than other people. I think the chances of you getting all of those people back is slim to none. And so you would have to get people to join who only joined because it was Silver Sneakers. And now all of a sudden you're going to hit them with a $300 or $400 bill. And
He requires if we're going that direction, then we need to subsidize everybody the same. That it's unsustainable and if I'm okay with that, seriously okay with that. But it doesn't seem fair to say to the rest of the taxpayers that you have to pony up for this, or the families that they have to pay more for their services, But I would really like to see the hard numbers. I really would like to see exactly if folks were paying the full amount, what the actual, how much of the red would go away.
So we've done some of this and we could talk about it again. One of the things that I think would be helpful as a deliverable, I'm sure it's part of this planning process, is because where we've sort of hit a wall with our conversations with staff is the projection conversation. It's not gospel, but to have an actual market analysis of, given all of the different intervening variables that we have to consider, what would be a reasonable expectation for us to have if we made a change in order to adjust the subsidy program that we're currently offering to the Silver Sneakers program? What could we reasonably expect in terms of retention for the folks that are using the program right now as full members, based on everything that everybody has brought up? We've had several things change recently since we started the program. There's a new facility in Wyndham, there's a new facility at UConn. Obviously, COVID is a factor, and where we've kind of left it with staff before you came in was we're gonna try a number of sort of recruitment tactics to bring new Silver Sneakers people in the door. And I think there's been some success with them, but certainly clearly not a success that would turn the finances of the program around. The break-even point in the program, given the capitation, is high. It's many multiples of what we have now in terms of people utilizing the program, right? So having that market analysis would be helpful. I agree with Terry. Because this program is primarily available to people who are on the state employee retirement system, who have state employee retiree healthcare, and whenever Comptroller Lembo added it in 2016, this particular Medicare Advantage program, which could always change, and not available to anybody else, we are, by continuing this program, choosing to subsidize this population's healthcare over someone who is retired from being a plumber, who might have money in the 401k but doesn't have a Medicare Advantage plan, or this particular one. And so if we're going in the direction of adjusting our subsidies to be entirely need-based, then it would follow to me that we would also adjust this program to provide a better need-based scholarship for membership to people of all ages with lower incomes, rather than just people who are enrolled in this particular Medicare Advantage plan. But I also don't want to do something like that if it means that we put the program further underwater. And I also don't want to do something like that if it means that we're going to have really bad health outcomes for a significant portion of our population, just because we don't want to contribute what is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small subsidy, especially compared to some of the other things on this list.
So
Also want to add that we are expecting some substantial revenue increases over the next couple of years. And while I know that we're going to need some of that for facilities planning and other capital projects, I think we should take a serious look at finding ways of making the Parks and Recs programs more available to more members of the community and not less. So that's my perspective on it.
I would suggest, I don't, maybe this is a little risky to do on the fly because Jamie would have more experience with this. Maybe she won't think this would be a useful endeavor, but I think perhaps one of the things we should look at doing would be what I'll call, a targeted willingness to pay survey. We can isolate, I would hope, within our existing Silver Sneakers member database, the population that would be impacted by any change in that program, i.e. discontinuation of the program, and put together a very simple survey with a little bit of explanation about why we're even asking the question, about why, again, the sentence of the elevator speech about financial sustainability and equity and these, whatever we want to hit on, but ask these people point blank. Now, it's not going to be 100% accurate because we all know willingness to pay. It's always different than when it actually happens and now you have to pay something. But Jamie, I don't know what your thoughts are. If we, you know, if we extracted that population and we sent a mailing or a survey, online survey to those people and said, if we discontinued this program for these are the reasons why we're thinking about doing it, would you transfer into a full member paying? And then you at least have a sense, maybe an order of magnitude sense, are we going to lose 80%? Or are we going to lose 8%?
Yeah, you could do a retention inquiry, right?
But do you agree that it would, I mean, put us in the ballpark of what the impact would be as opposed to
Well,
like,
it's like anything else, right? People will answer the question the way they feel in the moment. It doesn't mean it's going to translate to a sale down the road, right? We don't know, but that's something that maybe Jay and his team could do. It's outside the scope of the master plan, but it certainly would be interesting to feed into this particular analysis and what that would translate to in terms of projected revenue. I think it would be easy enough to do because you have a targeted distribution list. So you could ask a few questions. You just never know. I mean, market behavior today is precarious and people say they'll do one thing and they turn around and don't do it. So, but it gives you a baseline from which to work. It might be able to help you and help us as part of this work translate it into a numeric, right? A dollar amount that says, here's where you are. In contrast, here's where we project we might be in the next 2, 3, 5 years. The one thing I'll also share real quickly is there's lots of conversations across the country about the future of the Silver Sneakers program because the demographic has changed and it's going to continue to change. Like you said, aging out. We've got 3 generations over the age of 50 now, 3.5. Senior is not what it used to be. Right, Jay? Because we're both turning 60 in a month. or 2 months,
Medicare
so-
Advantages are disastrous for the Medicare system.
Yeah.
The government is wasting tons of money on them. And
Yeah.
right now we're subsidizing that. We're actually making it such that they can give a benefit away on our backs rather than on their own. They're very, very wealthy companies. They should be paying us a whole lot more for providing what is being considered a medical service. So it's trash all the way around. And I would really like us, I've said this before, to push back against the Medicare Advantage plan and demand we're going to do this higher reimbursement. That said, I think it would be helpful if we looked at a comparable community that had a community center to see what the ratio of people who are 65 and older who are members of that would tell us essentially what we would look at like if we were to no longer take the Silver Sneakers as payment.
I just want to clarify the asks on the floor outside of the scope of the master plan. We will do the analysis. We will do a narrative around Silver Sneakers and what our thoughts are relative to the trend and the change in the future. If there's an interest in doing a benchmarking analysis or something like that, I could talk to Ryan and Jay about what that would look like, but a market analysis for Silver Sneakers is not part of this particular process.
Staff could contact another community and find out what the percentage. I don't think we need a big study for this.
You could.
I don't know what Tallinn looks like, or I defer to the experts here, but just other communities are not taking Silver Sneakers. So do they have a similar base of seniors who are participating in their programs? And the other thing is to think about pivoting more services into our senior center that are Silver Sneaker based. So there are other ways to do it. We want to make sure to take some Silver Sneakers people to make sure that people do have an appropriate, have a place to go to exercise.
Can I understand? I'd like to understand the Silver Sneakers deal better. Are we forced? Is it a yes or a no? We're forced to take this
Yes.
minimal amount?
It's
We-
part of the CBAC negotiations for state employees around healthcare.
But we didn't negotiate with those people. So I'm
No,
wondering-
but if we have retired state employees who remain in the healthcare system, who are over 65, get it.
Okay, great. They get it. Got it.
And they don't have a choice to get out of it.
And
Okay.
we don't have a choice to
But-
negotiate its terms.
But hold on a second. I want to understand. I'm running I'm running a community center, by the way. And now I want to not lose money on this Silver Sneakers thing. Am I not allowed to by some contract I didn't sign? Or maybe we did sign. That's what I'm trying to understand. To charge these people who want to use the Silver Sneakers a base fee of make up
No,
a number,
can't charge, there are
$200, and then
specific,
they pay a use fee each time they come.
There's a specific series of classes that are silver sneakers classes. Anything you, if you're silver, and I speak from experience, I do the aquatherapy. I pay for the aquatherapy at the aquatherapy price. If I took a silver sneakers course, they would get paid what the silver sneakers pays for them.
So
And I
we-
don't pay a full membership. My full membership is assumed because I'm a silver sneakers member.
I'm gonna push back. We can negotiate. Wyndham Hospital, when it's not getting enough money for services from the Medicare Advantage plans, it says, it makes a big stink. It says, we're no longer gonna do this. It gets all of it, the members irate, gets the whole community. We could do the same thing. We could have the members of this community push back and against the
Or-
Medicare
Or we
Advantage
just have a
plan.
copay. I mean, we have a.
No,
No, can't do that.
so hold on.
Hold-
There's two questions. There's Terry's question of whether we can make a stink with the state comptroller, with
And
the
with the
unions,
unions.
with the governor, we're gonna cancel this program if our rates don't improve and hope that we get an outcome of our rates improving. There's Chris's question of whether we have the ability to call the Medicare Advantage company and say, you are letting us swipe for $3. We would like to swipe for $5, and we'd like no capitation. We'd like to amend our contract. We can do Terry's thing and see if we get an outcome. Chris, your thing, we can't charge a copay. We have certain requirements within the Silver Sneakers program that in order to be a Silver Sneakers vendor, we have to meet. And that includes that if a Silver Sneakers member swipes to go to the gym, that's it. We don't get to charge them money. They can't pay us a base fee. That counts. And we get paid what we have agreed to get paid from the Silver Sneakers program.
loss program. I mean.
Well, I mean,
It's not if you have 1,000 members who only 200 of them would have been your full members to begin with, who all use the program
But for us.
4 times a month, but for us, we're
Yeah.
losing money.
If everybody used the program 6 times a month, we might make, if everybody who's enrolled, we would make money. But because the membership nearly doubled when Silver Sneakers came in, but a very small percentage of those people come. And some of them don't even remember to swipe in when they come into a class. So it gets complicated. I want to say something totally different. This council has been shaped by a demand from some members of the community that the community center be entirely self-supporting. And because the recreation fund has been predominantly the community center, or has been seen as the community center, every time we put general fund money into that, it's seen as being a subsidy for the community center, which was always supposed to be self-supporting, and you lied to us 20 years ago. If we add all of the Parks and Rec costs to Parks and Recreation, and we are explicit that we are already subsidizing Parks and Recs to this much more significant amount, then we could increase the subsidy by a very small percentage and help cover a number of these costs. And it wouldn't make a huge dent in the budget. We might be able to accomplish some things, but I think there's some real advantages to making the bottom line of the pot bigger. Politically.
I'm not comfortable though with going forward with one segment of the population paying so little and the rest paying so much. Yeah.
Within my scheme, there would be opportunities to work out equity. What I'm thinking is it would make additional subsidies more palatable, because we would be saying to people, as we have always said, look, Parks and Rec is more than the community center, and we're paying for that as well as the community center. And they say, and then it comes back to us, you're putting a subsidy into the community center. We say, no, it's into Parks and Rec. But now we to put some subsidy into the community center. And I think if we put all of the actual costs of Parks and Rec into one pot, then if we increased that pot by a percentage, it would be a smaller percentage than if we just subsidize the community center and its programs. So does that make sense?
Can I ask a specific question unrelated to Silver Sneakers, just sort of going back through this list? The pool comes up here a lot. pretty much every category, it seems, of pool usage, with maybe a few exceptions, is in this top 15 list. Number 3 is private swim lessons. Why can you explain why this sort of shows as such a big subsidy or big loss?
Because next to indoor ice rinks, indoor pools are the largest money suck in the public sector, public parks and recreation. They're very expensive to operate, heat, manage, et cetera. So they're just expensive assets.
And so when specific to how the different usages of the pool show up here, were you able to look at percentage of pool usage being borne by these particular parts, or did you just sort of split it up? I just
No.
ask because private swim lessons they're expensive to begin with, and they're not
Correct.
heavily offered, and it seems crazy that we're losing $100,000
Yeah,
when we're
because
already
it's a
charging
small,
$300
it's a
per
small
kid.
participant pot, right? We're looking at the number of participants and we're attributing the expense based on that.
But are
So
you,
that's why they're there.
so you're attributing the expense, how though? So
So based
you've
on
got
the,
a pool.
it's on everything. It's participant rate, it's the hours that they're in the pool, it's the attribution of the expenses specific to the aquatic facility. We have to make some assumptions to the exercise based on the square footage of the facility, how large the pool is. We work with Public Works and facilities to find out what the utility expenses are. So all those things go into that particular analysis.
So for private, I'm just trying to understand, for something like private swim lessons, you've got a pool with 8 lanes across it. I've never been there when all 8 lanes are open to private swim lessons. So you've always got 4 lanes with someone who's either a Silver Sneakers member or a paying member swimming laps. And then you've got a couple of private teachers in half of the pool with 4 kids who are all paying $300 a pop to go to private swim lessons, half an hour a week for 6 weeks. We're losing $100,000 when you say this is a kid in a pool for half an hour a week for 6 weeks
For all of your lessons. Yes,
for all the private lessons. So this
Yes,
is not group
correct.
lessons, correct?
correct. I want to point out, I don't recall who said this, but just something that I think I need to say based on this work. Really interesting conversation around Silver Sneakers in a small market base. Your 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, 4, and 5 services are all small market base as well.
What do you mean by that?
So we're talking about a small market base of Silver Sneakers. It's a small market base of soccer players in the community. It's a small market base of baseball players in the community. It's a small market base of private swim lesson participants. So there's a cautionary tale around just looking at participation as a driver for decisions around subsidy investment. Just an observation that I wanted to throw it on the table.
I'd also like to have us think about how, okay, we don't let WAM use the soccer fields. We still have that $103,000 cost. It just gets redistributed. And it's the same thing with the private swim lessons. Just take that out. We still have $95,000 to come up with. It's got to come up, it's got to get distributed. That expense makes everything else more expensive.
You actually wouldn't have that level of investment because of the maintenance, because of the staffing. There's a series of
Okay.
expenses that are
So
assumed.
it's $90,000.
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on the
Then it's
intent.
75 or it's 50,000.
Okay.
But it's the point, my point is, I
It's
think
not
you've got-
zeroed out if that's,
The asset. It's a
Right.
question of then what would you do?
Oh,
with
yeah,
it?
that's what I'm saying. It gets
Yeah.
redistributed.
Yeah.
That expense, that $103,000 for the soccer field gets placed somewhere else. It doesn't go away.
And swim lessons are super important. One of the things pediatricians are really, really concerned about are rates of drowning with children. So all of these decisions, obviously, we need to be, it's more than just how much money we're making or losing on it. It's the importance to the community, which of course you started us at. I recognize that. But I definitely hear Chris's point. We have this facility. So not everything is a target here. I don't think swim lessons are a target really of something. I mean, we might think about ways of increasing usage, but I don't think we're going to stop using the pool. It would be ridiculous.
No, I think the question that many staff struggle with relative to private, semi-private activities is the public sector in that business? is it more about group lessons, right? Swim lessons as opposed to private activities. And then it allows you to redistribute those resources, the staffing, the space, the money elsewhere in the community where you might have a broader reach. It might be a different kind of activity. So the subsidies being directed there now, it doesn't mean that it needs to be, should be down the road. That's a decision obviously the organization needs to make.
I have another question about the pool. Major use of the pool is for E.O. Smith, and we have a contract with E.O. Smith that gives a price that was fixed 20 years ago.
Right, it's by contract, on the land acquisition or
Yeah,
swap or whatever, how you want to term it, but we have increased that price, not necessarily specific to E.O. Smith, but we've increased our pool rental price, and then the agreement is 50% of whatever the pool rental price is what E.O. Smith gets. If that makes sense. So it's increased over the years, but it's Smith pays
half of
half
what,
of it, yeah.
what they need to pay. Could we raise that to 60% or?
I think that agreement, the way I read it, was signed by the superintendent of schools at the time and the town
And it
manager.
goes
So
forever. It's a land agreement. I
it
got
also
it.
goes into ball fields. So E.O. Smith has access to Southeast Park ball fields and football at Spring Hill. There was, so there's an agreement that goes beyond the community center for that land acquisition.
Of course, we paid for E.O. Smith too, so it's basically our money going in and coming back, so it might not make.
Unlike the youth sports that include Ashford and Wellington, yes, we.
Is the rental rate that we charge realistic based on the figures you've gotten here?
I would say they're getting a good deal.
No. Is the rental rate, then you said E.O. Smith gets a discount, is the standard rental rate appropriate to our costs?
To the 100% rate to
Yeah.
any other, it's gone up over time. We're
No, is
probably,
it appropriate to our costs?
I believe so. Yes. I mean, we look at, you know, cost for lifeguards and chemicals. We have looked at this before.
Mhm.
And we just raised it last year too, because the cost of lifeguards and chemicals went up. And so I believe that rental rate is accurate for what we need to get to recover our costs for that hour rental.
Doesn't count overhead, doesn't count the big overhead costs like electricity and.
There's a small percentage that we put in there for that. It may not be accurate, but we do include a percentage beyond just chemicals and lifeguards.
Okay.
So
The intention of this process was to identify and attribute the indirect expenses. So we know, again, some assumptions were made given this was year one, but the idea was to attribute the facility expenses and the administrative expenses. So
Can you page through numbers 6 through 15?
Sure.
We've been looking at these and I've forgotten what is on the rest of this. Okay, good. Bicentennial Pond. Why, and so my assumption with the expense of Bicentennial is it's primarily lifeguard fee costs in the summer, is that right? Compared to any of the other trails in the town?
then there's park maintenance that goes along with that, which is what I think.
Okay, but it's broken out separately from the rest of the open access where we are mowing things because we have staff and other things that we don't have at River Park or some of the other places that have a
it's a
field.
designated service area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
Why do we subsidize, what's the subsidy explanation for personal trainers?
I would imagine it's some of the overheads costs that were not reflected because if you look at a pure cost for instructor cost that's paid, those direct costs, we recover beyond that, but.
So is this another example?
It's
of
part
if
of the
we said-
exercise that,
If
What-
they had.
that it's
that's
showing
why they
now.
Did this to figure this out. They just, here's a fair price, boom, but oh my gosh, Jamie finds out it's actually costing you fill in the blank.
Right,
They-
I understand, but I guess what my point is, it's the same point that you made earlier, Chris. If we said, oh man, we're subsidizing personal training, this is the epitome of something that we shouldn't be subsidizing. And anyone can hire any of these people to come into their house and personal train them. They don't need to come to the community center and pay us for it. We'll cut it out. we are pricing that service at our cost of delivering it, not including this $43,000 of overhead primarily.
But not
And so
including the cost.
If it went away, we would redistribute this $43,000 across
Would
other
we? I mean,
programs.
that's just the gym standing. That's the air conditioning, that's right?
But yes,
I
that's
mean,
part of
the money
expense.
would, we would just be getting less money in because we wouldn't be.
That's my point, yeah.
Well, I think you'd be charged with providing a different service line. Is it a different way to reach an older adult market? Is it a different way to deliver childcare services? Can you redistribute those resources and have a different / bigger impact on the community? And personal training becomes one of those things. Again, it's a very exclusive service. Is that where the town wants to invest its subsidy in contrast to, do we think differently about Silver Sneakers? Do we think differently about our childcare services? Those kinds of things. Those are questions. But is that how you want to invest your subsidy resources? I think is the fundamental question and really becomes a baseline question for this entire exercise. Is this where you want to put your resources?
It would be helpful at some point as the council thinks about programmatic changes. I'm sure staff talk about this or have these numbers, or it'll be part of your report or whatever, but to see a breakdown of sunk cost versus actual programmatic expense when it comes to this discussion, because we could eliminate half of the services. We could decide, I'm not saying we're going to do this, but we could decide that half of the things on this list, the pool and personal training and private swim lesson and whatever, need to go away. We're subsidizing their clearly private things. It's something the private sector should take care of itself. And we don't need, the public sector should get out of this business and let's get out of it. But we'd still have overhead in it. So if as this may be the case, this is 40 grand of the overall overhead of the center being attributed to personal training. If we get rid of it, unless we make significant cuts to the overhead of the center, we are just going to redistribute that.
Right, if you don't
overhead
avoid the
across other
cost, if you
programs.
don't avoid the cost, you haven't saved anything by foregoing the revenue.
Right.
But you actually bingo, you forego revenue as well.
Right.
So it's an odd mix. So you got to heat the gymnasium the whole time. Do you want to take in a loss operation that gives you some subsidy, us some subsidy to heat the gym and have it look like a loss when it gets reported to us by a consultant, or just let it go be a total loss?
I do want to just go back, beating Silver Sneakers kind of to death here, but just real quick on what Terry was saying. So, I'm not saying that Jay nor I have pulled out all the stops here in terms of trying to leverage, public outcry and sort of galvanize the community around our threats to pull out. But we did, when our last contract was up, we basically said, we're really seriously considering pulling out, that the economics don't work for us, et cetera, et cetera. You have to do better with the per swipe reimbursement rate to make this worth our while. And because we were getting $3 a swipe, and they basically said, well, okay, here you go. Special deal, only good for today, right? If you lock in for 3 years, we'll up it to $3.30 a swipe. So we passed. Yeah. So we said, well, okay, we'll stick with what we currently have. We obviously we're in a position to make the policy decision to disband it. So we signed a 1-year contract, continuing with the 3, knowing we were going through this exercise, and maybe at the end of this, the council would decide, yeah, this is the change we're making. But I just want to point out, who knows if we pushed it further, if we tried to do a grassroots campaign. I'm not saying the outcome would have been different, but we tried at a staff level to say, we're serious and this is what it is. And we got, okay, this is how much we'll sweeten the pot. And it was basically a slap in the face. So, I mean, I think it would take a lot. It's Tivity is the name of the broker, whatever you want to call it, that we negotiate with. They didn't seem particularly alarmed at our saying, well, we're gonna pull out.
This is a contract that's negotiated between the unions and the state. We have political contacts on both ends. And I have been saying for years now that we ought to go talk to CBAC and we ought to go talk to the comptroller's office about the consequences of these prices. I have no idea what would come out of it, but I don't know whether they're hearing these problems from other communities or not. But we certainly are in a position where we could raise some sand
And Joe Courtney is not a fan of Medicare Advantage plans and very knowledgeable about Medicare. And could put pressure on the federal level, or, just be part of the conversation. But I mean, one way of framing it, I mean, looking at it, is, that, they are undervaluing their members. And undervaluing what we're doing here as a community. They're taking advantage of us, and it's simply not right.
The particular agreement is between the state and a plan. And I don't know how much federal standards have anything to do with it, but it is negotiated directly between the comptroller's
Yeah, but
office and
Medicare
the.
Advantage is federal. It's Medicare. So,
But it's a particular insurance company that offers the Advantage plan.
yeah, but the country, so Medicare Advantage is your Medicare. What the state did is, in lieu of continuing to pay for your Medigap policies, it stuck you all in Medicare Advantage plans and say, oh, this is wonderful. You get this free gym membership. Yay, you. And it was a total scam. And it's hurting us. That all said, Medicare Advantage is completely bound by federal regulation, the federal statute. And so.
Including the Silver Sneakers reimbursement plan?
Including their special benefits, including whether or not they can, if they're hurting communities,
Well,
which they're hurting us, we can say to our congressman, we can say, this Medicare Advantage plan is a federal program that's hurting using federal dollars and hurting our town.
Well, we can do that too, but I think we gotta have an all fronts, approach, and
I think we
it
ought to
can't
make a
hurt.
plan for how to keep the community center open regardless of whether
Yes.
we're able to adjust
It's
this
sneakers.
program. I'll point out that the state employees bargaining unit is primarily concerned with state employees, not retirees, and often negotiates away retiree
Retirement
benefits in order
benefits.
to obtain benefits for their active employees. And that's exactly what they did in 2017 when they negotiated this plan, and it's not up for renegotiation for quite a while. So
Yeah.
I have a strong, and while Comptroller Scanlon's a wonderful person who I'm proud to support, Mansfield doesn't hold quite as much political sand as the State Employees Bargaining Coalition when it comes to raising Cain about something like this. So we should try and see if
Yes.
we can make a little progress, but I do think we need to come up with a plan that recognizes that even if we double our rate, we are still going to lose money on this program, and that they offered us 10% last time we talked to them. And so we can maybe do better than that, but we're not going to get this, even if we are successful, likely will not turn this program around and turn it into a profit center for the town. Right? I mean, that's a fair
Absolutely.
statement.
Absolutely.
We're so far from that point that
I'm just really concerned that if we get rid of it, we'll lose far more members than we realize. Silver Sneakers is offered at $10 a month with a $10 a month membership at all the surrounding fitness centers. It'd be very easy for people to walk away. If all they're concerned with is the gym activities, they can go anywhere. If all they're concerned with is water activities, they can go to Wyndham.
But then
I
there's
mean-
no harm, because then they're still getting the fitness that they want. They're just getting it someplace else, and another gym is losing the money.
Yeah, that's why I was curious.
But
Are
the
gyms
private
forced to take
gyms don't
$3?
don't lose money. They just get money from it because they're running on their own profit. They're profitable as they were. If they get additional members, fine.
Because they didn't lose a membership the way we did.
Right.
But do they still get $3?
Yes.
Pop? They get the same rate. Does this happen across the state? $3? It's
Yes.
$3 in New
I
Canaan
mean,
and $3 in.
There's a
Woodstock?
negotiation. There might be some individual results may vary. I don't think you'd find that it's wildly different. Like I said, they offered us the $3.30 per
Gotcha.
swipe if we locked in for a longer period of time,
Mhm.
which we weren't that interested in. So if we were offered $3.30, maybe somebody else is getting $3, somebody else is getting $3.40, but it's not like somebody else is getting 10 and we're getting 3.
So Jamie, we're coming close up on 8 o'clock. How
Yep.
close are to?
We're gonna wrap it up. So I'm gonna see if you have any additional thoughts, comments, questions. I'll share a few thoughts And then I'm going to do a little bit of a quick advance here and take you to a process overview. But any additional thoughts, comments that you have at this point?
I think we should move on because it's getting really late and our attention span is going to start to erode.
And I just want to bring the council back a bit of, I wouldn't say full circle, but back to the conversation. I'm not sure it was much of a conversation, but the presentation and the content of the discussion around capital. That's a significant part of this exercise, is looking at your capital investments and the capital requirements you're going to need. And relative to the Mansfield Community Center, we do know that in years 20 to 30, that's where the greatest investment needs to be made in brick and mortar. So your facility, your community center is going to likely require significantly more than what is shown on that screen, that average $300,000+ a year. So operating is part of this, obviously, as well as taking care of your infrastructure and your assets. I'm going to do a quick review here. I'm going to bypass all of these because of time. Real quickly, just to remind you that the financial sustainability work is a complement to the master plan. And it really will help inform the recommendations, the overall recommendations included in the plan, specific to, as we discussed earlier, ADA improvements and the transition plan, any future services, if any, that are recommended to the organization to consider, and then your approach to partnerships. We often talk about partnerships require reciprocity. We in government, I think, often label partnerships, and they're actually opportunities for the municipality to grant resources. When the town or the city doesn't receive something on behalf of its taxpayers, it's a one-way relationship. So we'll be looking at the partnerships that exist, that are defined as partnerships, and likely make some recommendations relative to how to think about partnerships moving forward. And then, of course, as part of the master plan, there's a component that is referred to as an implementation plan. And that's where identified priorities, we'll think about them as pillars to the implementation plan that will include goals, actions, and then performance measures. So this work around the money really is going to help inform these pieces and these critical pieces of the overall master plan. And then just a quick update for all of you. We're obviously moving forward in the process. We started with the kickoff in January. It was a bit delayed. There was a little bit of a pause until February, and then things kind of took off in February. You see this first phase as the financial sustainability strategy. We started this work quite a long time ago, but there's a series of steps that have been accomplished. We're down there where you see the 95 and 75% cost of service analysis. We're close to completion. I had expected my colleague who's in Canada, who's our data analyst, to be with us this evening, but he couldn't access the Zoom meeting because he was going to be in the shadows in the event we needed his suggestions. Their financial sustainability strategy alternatives, that's part of when we start getting into the goal setting. That won't happen until the cost of service is complete. Be working with the professional staff to make recommendations relative to goals. And then the strategy development, of course, we use the beneficiary service as the baseline. So you can see some of the steps and moving parts of this work. Then the master plan development, a little bit more detail here. We've got quite a few things that have been checked off the list, but still work to do. We're about 75% done with the demographic and trends analysis. We're going to be starting on the recreation programs analysis. We select 20 to 25 services the organization provides and actually filter it through something called the McMillan Matrix. We look at market position, competitive landscape, a series of other things. The silver sneakers will be one of those. And then, of course, the additional pieces here, we're working with one of our subs to do a deeper dive into the parks, trails, preserves area and do an analysis. The ADA access audit's probably about 80–90% complete. We're in the process of receiving the draft transition plan. And then at the very end of this, of course, there'll be recommendations around capital as well as the implementation plan that I mentioned earlier. So a very ambitious project, lots of moving parts, but things are moving along, and we're hoping we'll have this done with a draft report right around the holidays.
You skipped over about 3 or 4 slides that looked, they flew by, they looked kind of interesting.
They're very interesting. Unfortunately, we are at time. I'm happy to go through a couple of them quickly if you'd like. That's up to the council.
Quick, please.
You pay attention. I just wanted to share with you, this work has become critically important to the park and recreation space. I've been in this field 34 years, 20 as a practicing professional, and I'm really thrilled with the work of some systems and really concerned by the work of others. And so this is among the more important things we can do, is pull the curtain back, as they say, right, and understand our fiscal condition. You have a beneficiary of service model. It's a draft, of course, that hybrid, and where we are at is close to the place where we transform that into your strategy, your financial sustainability strategy. And what that essentially means is we look at the results of the cost of service work and then work with the staff again to set goals, those cost recovery goals or subsidy goals, depending on which lens you'd like to look through. I like to share these 3 slides because I think they help create a bit of clarity regarding the approach a municipality, special district may want to take. This first one, and please let me say that the service categories you see on the screen are going to be static for the next 3 slides. We've used service categories from an organization in the Chicago metro area just to illustrate the differences between different types of philosophies or approaches to strategy development. You see some similarities to Mansfield's categories here, like open access and community events and drop-in and so on. But this is an example of how one organization may, and again, it's an example of how one organization may approach cost recovery. What you see is a system completely reliant on their general fund. The expectation is the money will always be there, the tax money will always be there, yet we've got to have some recovery. But what this illustrates is a heavy reliance on the general fund moving forward. Again, 100% cost recovery and no reinvestment back into this particular organization. You see, again, similarities to your model by virtue of the definitions of common good or social purpose, and of course, individualized or exclusive and social enterprise on the top. We take these same service categories and we translate them or transform them onto a more slightly ambitious model. This one's titled Financial Sustainability. Same progression of categories, but you see slightly different approach to cost recovery here, a little bit more ambition. So you see those services that are considered more highly individualized or specialized up at the top right of the continuum, with a cost recovery expectation now that's at 100% or more. And the question on the floor is things like customized or personalized activities like personal training, for example, specialized business operations, golf courses, water parks, cemeteries, those kinds of things that are common in public parks and recreation, and then resale items, you know, vending machine items or swim goggles or whatever it may be. You see more ambition with those categories. The expectation and suggestion by virtue of this model is you're going to have continued reliance on the general fund, but a little bit less. You're starting to see a little bit more self-reliance on the system, on behalf of the system. And of course, some expectation that we'll begin to reinvest in our operation. Finally, and this is actually a real model, this is a community investment strategy, a slightly different approach to thinking about strategy. Community investment was called out as a label on behalf of this organization because they wanted to put their subsidies into the services that they felt aligned with the common good, and that's it. You can see the 5th category and on up, 0% subsidy. You'll notice with this one, it doesn't say cost recovery, it says subsidized. So while we know it means the same thing, same coin, different sides of the coin, they wanted to emphasize how they were spending taxpayer dollars. So therefore they called them subsidy goals. But you see competitive activities all the way up to the top, there's no subsidy being directed to those services. The principal reason this organization is highly ambitious is because they have to reduce their reliance on the general fund. The money is not there as it once was. They're planning for the future, as they often say. And this system has a lot of inequity in the community that they want to address, and they have a deferred maintenance load that is concerning to them. They want to reinvest in their infrastructure. So they can't expect to get the money out of the general fund. They want to start to create non-reverting funds and enterprise funds and those kinds of things where they can actually use the resources as they like. So same categories, same progression, but very different approaches philosophically to how they want to think about cost recovery or subsidy investment. So I wanted to share these with you just so you could get an idea of how they kind of come to life. And every system's different. I just, again, used a static set of categories to illustrate the different kinds of approaches that we're seeing in different parts of the country. So those are the slides, Mayor, that I went by pretty quickly.
I'm glad you went back. Those are very helpful. So, I think that concludes our evening. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Shaken, seconded by Mr. Kiefner. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I think we are unanimous. Thank you very much, Jamie. This work is really in depth, and there's a lot more than we're seeing, so I'm looking forward for the rest of it.